This is Breakthrough News, and you are watching The Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here truly alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, great to be back alongside you.
It is wonderful to be sitting in this lovely studio.
Indeed.
Alongside you, Eugene.
It's fantastic. Now I get to see what you do on your computer during the show, so I can see what's...
Well, I'm about to tweet the show out.
Nice.
That's the first thing I do.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out because it's a great time to remind people that you should be sharing this show and letting people know that we're getting ready to go live here. Alert them, or I guess not getting ready to. We are here. We are live. We're making things happen. But let them know that we are on the air moving forward with The Freedom Side. However you want to do that, you could tweet, you could post it on Instagram, give a phone call, shoot a text, whatever that may be. And in addition to that, if you are watching on YouTube, now would be as good a time as any for you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, then hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things that you have subscribed to, because we've got a lot of great content coming to you very regularly from Breakthrough News, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek. So go ahead, hit subscribe, hit the bell, and you will be pretty much all set to make sure you are on top of everything coming from Breakthrough News. If you're watching on Free Speech TV, just keep on watching and keep on supporting FSTV. And shout out to the whole team there for everything y'all do every week to make it possible for us to appear to you on that platform as well. Rania, are there other things you would like for our viewers to know?
Eugene, there are a few things I'd like our viewers to know. One is that all of this work we do here at Breakthrough News, The Freedom Side, Live, Dispatches, hosted by me, the Socialist Program, the China Report. We have so much amazing journalism that we're bringing you. We're able to do that with support from our audience. And so if you are able to, I encourage you to please support Breakthrough News, an important independent media outlet in this very crucial moment, by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News, where for as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content, as well as exclusive merch, including this very cool Breakthrough News mug. That has two sides to it.
Indeed.
But most importantly, you'll be supporting independent media at a time when we are just flooded with a tsunami of media that lies for corporations, lies for war. A lot of the horrors that are intensifying right now, we're going to be talking about on this show today. And we're able to do that only because of your support. So help keep us going and growing by becoming a member of Breakthrough News. Patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And also, make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Smash that like button, you guys. I'm saying it in person.
I appreciate that.
I know how much Eugene loves when I say smash that like button.
You're like a Lin-Manuel Miranda. You've got all sorts of little
like button.
Little lines. Since I know you're a Hamilton fan, I'm glad to see the creativity.
Every time. I'm never going to live it up. I liked watching it for like 1 year. I'm sorry, guys. It's catchy music.
Listen, what do you want me to say? It's sort of like the South Pacific of the 21st century. But, look, I don't want to get into musicals here, but you got to do something in a pretty terrible set of... Go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say, to pivot away from talking about musicals, this is my first time in person with the new studio set up, and it looks incredible. So shout out to Craig, who I believe put the studio together, one of our amazing cameramen, video editors. It looks beautiful, and it's so nice to be sitting next to you in person.
It is. It's fantastic, and we're not like super crowded together like we used to be. I think we look a little
bit
more
with the wobbly
professional.
table. You guys, we had a wobbly table.
I don't know what's...
I mean, it was like I was terrified it was going to collapse at any moment.
Well, listen, it's got to keep yourself sharp.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, let's get this show on the road, as they say. A number of different points that we're going to touch on, but of course, quite a bit of what we're talking about is revolving around the ongoing genocidal conduct by Israel as it concerns their actions against the Palestinian people, and the way that's spilling over regionally and, of course, globally as well, and shaping a range of different events. And we want to start talking a little bit about Yemen, which, of course, has been much in the crosshairs of the United States, and that's only intensifying, and how to really view this question of Yemen's intervention in the overall conflict that is emanating from Gaza. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Craig Mokhiber, who's a longtime human rights lawyer. Craig, thanks so much for being with us.
Good to be here, Eugene. Hi, Rania. Nice to see you both.
Well, great to have you here with us. And, I guess one of the things that not one of the things, the issue I really wanted to raise with you here, or we wanted to raise with you, is the issue of how we're seeing what's happening with Yemen. I mean, I think the way it's being portrayed, you see often, it's sort of like there's this rogue group called the Houthis that's just randomly firing missiles into Israel, and that this is some sort of totally out of bounds behavior. But I've noticed you've been making some good points in a range of different fora about how there's actually a close connection between Yemen's actions and the actual reality of human rights law based on what rulings have been made, vis-a-vis the genocide in Gaza at the ICJ and other places. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the whole world who's been paying attention has been horrified, not just by the genocide in Palestine over the past year and a half, but by the lack of a strong and coherent response from the international community to a genocide that has been live streamed, that has been unfolding in front of our very eyes for all of these months, month after month. And you would think with this whole architecture built up since the Second World War of international law and international institutions, precisely to stop these kinds of mass atrocities, that something meaningful would have been done to stop it. But unfortunately, what we've seen instead was, one group of states like the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and some other Western states have actually joined directly in perpetrating the genocide. There's no other way to put that. They have been directly involved in the commission of these crimes on the ground alongside their ally, Israel. Then you've got another big group of Western states that have chose to be complicit in the genocide in other ways by supplying the genocide machine with fuel, with spare parts, with diplomatic cover, other things necessary to continue the genocide. Then you've got a large number of states from all regions who have chose to basically just remain silent and passive, which I have said is a breach of their international legal obligations, because all states have an affirmative obligation under international law to act to prevent and stop genocide and to enforce international humanitarian law. Most states have done nothing at all to these ends. Then you've got a fourth group of states that have opposed the Israeli regime in public statements. They've taken diplomatic action in their votes in the Security Council, in the UN General Assembly. They've joined cases in international tribunals like the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. They've done that. But then there's another group, which is the smallest group, that have taken concrete steps to actively meet their obligations under international law. Remember, all states are obliged to do everything in their power to stop this genocide from continuing in Palestine. Who has actually done that? South Africa, when they brought Israel to trial in the International Court of Justice for genocide. I've said arguably Hezbollah, not a state, but it is a significant actor in that state, because it has engaged Israeli forces militarily, initially in territory illegally occupied by Israeli forces, the Shabab farms in South Lebanon, to draw Israeli assets away from the genocide. And the third one that you mentioned very significantly, Yemen under Houthi control. Because, I think your viewers are more sophisticated than those watching corporate media, and they probably know that, the Houthis, Ansar Allah, they announced in response to Israel's genocide in Palestine that it would block shipping into the Red Sea that was headed to resupply the Israeli regime as long as it continues the siege and the genocide in Gaza. And it's been using this choke point at the head of the Red Sea called Bab el-Mandeb, which means the Gate of Tears, in this narrow strait between Yemen and Djibouti at the opening of the Red Sea. And they started this targeted partial blockade in November of 2023 when the genocide started by boarding an Israeli ship, and then they sustained the blockade until the announcement of the most recent so-called ceasefire. In my view, it was never a ceasefire, but the announcement of the ceasefire in Gaza. And at that moment, the Houthis lifted the blockade while the ceasefire was going on, demonstrating that they were doing this as a humanitarian intervention in order to meet what the International Court of Justice has said is the responsibility of all states, and what the General Assembly in its implementing resolution has confirmed is the responsibility of all states, to do everything in their power to stop the genocide and the siege that was being imposed on Gaza. Some ships avoided the blockade by sailing around Africa, but most of them couldn't. So the major shipping companies stopped sailing to the Red Sea. and the port of Eilat in Israel went bankrupt, which means that this blockade was working. It was denying the Israeli regime many of the goods that it needed to continue the siege and to continue the genocide in Palestine. By the way, the International Court of Justice has also said that all states have international obligations to stop any supplies or trade or economy flowing to the Israeli regime that it can use in the illegal occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, including East Jerusalem. So again, these are acts that are consistent with requirements of international law that have been defined by the International Court of Justice and affirmed by the UN General Assembly. And demonstrated that the intent was what they said it was when they stopped it during the ceasefire. Now they have reinstituted the blockade because Israel has returned to expedited genocide and has reimposed the siege on the people of Gaza, and so the blockade is now in force again. In response, what's happening is the United States is bombing Yemen. So in response to Yemen's effort to help to stop genocide in Palestine, the United States is bombing Yemen, a country it's been bombing for over 2 decades now. It is violating international law and doing so. There's no question when the U.S. is bombing Yemen, that's an act of aggression in international law. It's unlawful. They're slaughtering civilians in the process. This is a country which is already poor, suffering from famine and medical crisis, internal displacement. They're putting their own soldiers at risk and risking a broader regional war. They're spending billions of dollars on this bombing campaign, which could go to lifting some of the misery that the people of Yemen have been suffering from for decades now, and it's lying to its own people in the United States about what's happening, all for that one purpose, that the U.S. wants to continue to assist Israel's genocide in Palestine. Just finish by saying this is another direct act of U.S. complicity or participation in genocide. And it constitutes a crime under international law as well. We could talk a little bit more about the legal theory behind my argument that what Yemen is doing is a humanitarian intervention, but that's the big picture.
Well, I think it's really interesting that you're framing Yemen's actions as humanitarian intervention because, the U.S. claims to have the right to essentially terrorize all of these countries into submission. They call it fighting terrorism. That's what the Trump administration has called it. I think even in the language that the U.S. Secretary of Defense said about Yemen, and then that Trump ended up putting out on Truth Social about Yemen, it was something along the lines of, we have to defend ourselves from Yemeni aggression or Houthi aggression against their terrorism aimed at our drones. So now they've decided that it's terrorism to shoot down American drones in their neighborhood. But meanwhile, none of these countries are ever spoken about in the sense that they have a right to self-defense, or specifically in the case of Yemen, the right to intervene against a genocide, which is what you're supposed to do. So can you talk a bit more about, 2 things. One, the argument with relation to humanitarian intervention and framing what Yemen's doing in that context as an act of humanitarian intervention. And that also can include military acts, by the way. And then the second to that is, does Yemen not have a right to defend itself? Everyone's always rattling on about Israel's right to defend itself. Does Yemen not have the right to defend itself now that the U.S. is committing acts of aggression against Yemeni civilians?
Well, Yemen absolutely has a right to defend itself. And remember, it's been under bombardment by the U.S. and the U.K. and the Saudis and others going back for a very long time now. This is not something that is new, and they have a right to defend themselves from that, which, as I said, that's an act of aggression on the part of those forces that are bombing Yemen. No question about it. They do not fall within the narrow requirements of self-defense under the UN Charter. They haven't been authorized under the Charter. And they're only claiming that these actions are, of course, they use the language of terrorism, but they justify it as essential to protect commerce. Well, protecting commerce is not in the hierarchy of international law, something that is equivalent to stopping genocide. Both the International Court of Justice and the UN General Assembly have found that all countries are legally obliged to cease any support for the Israeli occupation regime, and by the way, for the Israeli genocide. They're supposed to ban products. They're supposed to cut off military, diplomatic, economic, commercial, financial investment, trade with the Israeli occupation. They're supposed to respect the provisional orders of the International Court of Justice in the genocide case. They're supposed to respect their third state obligations under the Genocide Convention to stop it, and none of them are doing that. And to the contrary, what the U.S. action is doing, it is seeking to punish Yemen for trying to do what it can to stop the genocide that's happening in Palestine. And this norm in international law, the prohibition of genocide, also the right to self-determination, these in international law are called jus cogens norms, which just means they're the highest level peremptory norms from which there is no derogation. They apply to all states and all situations all the time, right? This is the highest level, stopping genocide, for example. And they are also, in legal terms, erga omnes, which means they impose obligations on all countries, right? And the GA resolution adopted under Uniting for Peace, which gives it an enhanced power, has said that all states are obliged to do these things. Now you have Yemen, which sees a grave breach of international law happening in its territorial waters and adjacent to its territorial waters. That is the supplying of a regime that is perpetrating genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, gross and systematic violations of human rights. It sees that these ships are heading up the Gulf in order to provide the supplies necessary for Israel's crimes. And it moved to stop those violations. So in that sense, Israel is respecting those international obligations, and the U.S. is actively violating. Yemen is respecting those obligations, and the U.S. is actively violating them. And Yemen is being bombed for trying to respect them. Now, people will say, well, yeah, but Yemen doesn't. First of all, Yemen is a divided country. It basically has two governments, maybe three. And the Houthis, Ansar Allah, they control the part of the country which is adjacent to the Gulf. They control the capital of Sana'a. They control the largest amount of the population, and they have the capacity to intervene. And so they've chosen to use that capacity. The second argument is, well, they didn't get Security Council authorization. And this one is important because you're supposed to have Security Council authorization to use force, which the US does not have, by the way. But first, the Security Council has been entirely disabled by the United States throughout the genocide. The US, as a co-perpetrator of the genocide, has blocked action by the UN Security Council. And as a result, it's entirely inoperative for the purposes of the genocide in Palestine. It's just one more example of how the US is destroying the international legal system on behalf of this one oppressive foreign regime. Secondly, Yemen could argue that it's carrying out maritime law enforcement in its territorial waters, which doesn't require Security Council authorization. But even if it were said that the force that they're using doesn't fall within that law enforcement function, or someone challenged their status because of the divided government in the country, under the rules of the law of sea. By the way, the law of the sea treaty has been ratified by Yemen, but the U.S. refuses to ratify the treaty on the sea. It refuses to ratify many treaties because it acts as a rogue when it comes to international law. The Yemenis are claiming they're acting under the authority of international laws pronounced by the ICJ, reinforced by the General Assembly. And because the Security Council gets its mandate, and here's where I'm getting a little legalistic, the Security Council gets its mandate from the UN Charter. That charter is a treaty that is a part of international law. And that means the Security Council is subject to international law. It's not above it. Since both the prohibition of genocide and the right to self-determination are jus cogens rules, that means that the Security Council cannot supersede those rules in any of its actions, even if it were to take action. And if action by the Security Council can't supersede these norms, then inaction or omissions by the Council can't be said to supersede them, unless what you're saying is, unless the Security Council acts, no state is required to meet its obligations under international law to do everything in its power to stop a genocide and to enforce international humanitarian law. Now, let's say that somebody disagrees with what I'm saying, my legal assessment. The remedy for that in international law is not to bomb the Yemenis. The remedy for that is either to bring a case before the International Court of Justice, a contentious case for a dispute, and have the court decide, or get the GA, the General Assembly, to request an advisory opinion on the question. But it has no right to wage war on Yemen in this regard. So you have a conflict here in which one side is saying there's a genocide going on, All countries are supposed to do what they can to stop it. We're doing what's in our power because we are adjacent to this vital sea crossing. And we're being bombed by a country that is one of the perpetrators of the genocide. Beyond mere complicity, it is actively participating in the genocide in Palestine, using its power in the Security Council to block action. That can't be the intent of the international legal system as set up after the Second World War.
Wow. Well, that's, I have to say, a fascinating analysis. And I think, I wish it was more widely known and a very important context in terms of how people are talking about Yemen. So we really appreciate you, as always, coming to help us sort all this out. Craig Mokhiber, longtime human rights lawyer, thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you both. Thanks for what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. A lot there.
Yeah.
But I think it's important, because the idea that, the quote unquote Houthis, Ansar Allah, are acting as just some sort of like rogue element is obviously not the case. I mean, the rogue element here is the United States. I mean, Israel too, of course, but I mean, vis-a-vis quote unquote outside actors. So, I mean, the idea that somehow it's Yemen that needs to be reined in, I think takes on a very different cast when you put it in that context of international law. And it's a good reminder, I think, too, Rania, of just all of the rulings that have been made,
Could
against
you
Israel.
imagine if yes, and then could you just imagine if any other country in the world just started treating the U.S. the way that the U.S. treats all these other countries, the mayhem and horror and shock that would cause? But it's just so normal for the U.S. to just go and drop bombs on anything it doesn't like in the Middle East. That's just so normal. No one really even flinches when that happens anymore. It's very sad.
It is. Well, let's move to Lebanon, or Lebanon/Syria, where there's quite a bit going on at the border between those two countries, or at least has been for the past week or so, with its own implications for the region, major implications, I would say, for the region. And we are very happy to be joined once again by Dr. Anis Germany, who is a medical doctor, public health researcher, and political analyst. Anis, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, Eugene, Rania. Always here with bad news for you guys.
One day we'll have a very celebratory show, and we're going to bring on everyone from Lebanon and Gaza, and we're going to, toast each other. But we appreciate you. Yeah, we appreciate you always being willing. So I guess, I think probably for a lot of people, they just see that things are happening between Lebanon and Syria. They may be hearing a little bit about shelling or fighting between the two. So there's a lot to get into, but maybe you could just give us a capsule view, Anis, like the 20,000 feet of what's been happening in the past couple weeks in terms of border clashes there at the Lebanese-Syrian border.
Okay, so, first, it is important to understand that the reporting has been scant on both incidents that I'm going to mention. The first one happened around January. There was, an HTS infiltration into Lebanon. There was a kidnapping. That was at a time when HTS was asserting its dominance on its border towns. So in Syria, this is where they kidnapped, if I remember correctly, 12 people that happened to be Lebanese citizens, and these Lebanese citizens were part of a group of people, so a tribe in Lebanon. And then, since nothing was done with the issue, there was also an infiltration by HTS into the Lebanese territory, and then the tribe's people kidnapped those three individuals. 2 of them were killed, and then they were traded back for the 12 kidnapped Lebanese citizens. Then a clash ensued. The clash was, actually quite violent. HTS used drones and missiles, and they shelled the border towns. But the tribesmen, who are in Lebanon known to be very well armed and very well trained, because they also participated back in the days when HTS under Joulani, before he became, obviously president of Syria, they had occupied the border area between Lebanon and Syria. And then with a joint mission between the Lebanese army, Hezbollah, and these tribes people, they were able to liberate the area. So these people already know what HTS is and their military capabilities. So they fought them off this time in January 2025. Then again, 4 days ago, another incident happened. To this day, we still do not know exactly what triggered the issue. HTS and Joulani claimed that there were Hezbollah elements that they went into Syrian territory, kidnapped somebody. We heard nothing of the issue. We don't know what happened. Like this alleged person that was kidnapped or killed, we don't know what happened to this person and who that person is. However, local sources mentioned that some HTS fighters came into Lebanese territory, tried to steal 3 sheep of all things, and then a clash ensued between the local population and HTS. Lebanese officials did not mention any kind of story. There is no Lebanese official story that explains what happened. In any case, again, fighting ensued. There was shelling, and the army at some point intervened 2 days later, so that would be like 2 days ago. The army allegedly intervened, and they implemented some kind of ceasefire. However, the following day, the mayor of that village, of the Lebanese village on the border town, said that HTS fighters have entered the Lebanese territory, are inside the village, and they are burning and looting the entire place, and the army is doing nothing about it. So then the next day, the HTS retreated, the army went in. Some people were very upset because the tribes people were very much able to defend their town by themselves, but they allowed space for the army to assert its own dominance, to do whatever they want under the legitimacy under the umbrella of the state. But that apparently did not go according to their expectations. And then the army tried to take away their weapons, the tribes people. They took some of them. Today they sent them back. So it's obviously a mess, but what is clear in this entire thing is not the minutiae and the details and who did what, but that it seems that we are posed to go into like some kind of conflict with Julani. It doesn't seem like he is very much interested in having a normal diplomatic, non-violent relations with Lebanon.
Well, shocking that the former leader of Al-Qaeda wouldn't want diplomatic relations. Though, I guess I did think that he'd be too busy trying to establish his control over Syria to really be engaging in warfare with another country. It's quite shocking to see in many ways, Anis. And I wanted to ask, this comes after these horrific massacres that took place on the coast of Syria against Alawites that were quite sectarian motivated. And you have a lot of Syrians from minority groups who have, as a result, fled into Lebanon. And you also have the sort of pro-Al-Qaeda extremists in Lebanon, pro-HTS extremists, as what, I guess we could call them that, who were celebrating those massacres. And so I'm just curious, as we're talking about the sort of clashes between Syria and Lebanon, how these sectarian killings in Syria, which are probably going to be quite cyclical, I think, are impacting Lebanon and perhaps the potential they have for stirring up sectarian strife in Lebanon.
Yeah, well, we also forget Israel in the equation. I think Lebanon is going through a very dangerous time at the moment, through a conflagration of events. So first, there is definitely the fact that HTS is in charge of Syria now, and they're not interested in playing nice, which is obviously is not a surprise. Second, there is the fact that as I mentioned once before, that HTS did not take power, did not wrench it out. Like, they did not defeat the Syrian Arab Army. It's more that the Syrian Arab Army capitulated, and then Julani walked to Damascus and became de facto president, now dictator of Syria. But they required this violent, foundational moment, because in order to establish a state, you have to monopolize violence in a way, and they chose to exercise this violence on Alawites. This is the foundational moment of the new Syria, whatever it's going to look like. But it was basically done using the blood of the Alawites on the coast in Syria. And this is not some kind of random outburst. This is setting the tone for how new Syria is going to behave. And second, we have our own domestic issues in Lebanon, partly due to the sectarian system, partly due to the huge changes that are occurring in the domestic dynamic of power, and of course the foreign intervention that is so blatant. Never in the history of Lebanon has it been that blatant since maybe probably the Lebanese civil war. So there's that. And third, there is obviously the restart of the death machine in Gaza. This has changed a lot of things. So this means that, in a way, it's on the table that Israel might also restart its war on Lebanon, just as it did in Gaza, with no pretext, no alibi required. As long as if Lebanon is found not to be abiding enough or fast enough with some requirements, maybe by the U.S. administration, the threat is implicit. It doesn't have to be verbalized. And there were rumors in the past 24 hours that some threats have been verbalized. Witkoff, ended up denying some of them, not all of them. But actions speak louder than words, and the actions are terrifying. So this is where Lebanon is now. We are basically an island that is being squeezed from all sides and even from within. And if these events lead either to maybe, I don't know, a wider conflict with Syria, that is a problem because, as you said, there are supporters of HTS. I mean, Salafi ideology is quite powerful in Lebanon. We have a history of conflicts within Lebanon based on a Salafi ideology, and this ideology has been reinforced over time due to poverty and state neglect and just the normalization of violence inside Lebanon. So this is something we do not disqualify. Already there were some minor clashes, not all out violence, but more like street violence that happened in Tripoli and in the north. This is obviously where you have Salafi individuals, and also this is also where there's an Alawite community where more Alawites moved since the massacre that happened in the Syrian coastline. So the fact that these two populations are living in proximity in the poorest area in Lebanon, this is bound to create a lot of problems, I fear.
No, it seems like it's a very complicated landscape. And I wonder where, this leaves, I mean, it's speaking to some of the same point and extension of maybe the point you're already making about the sort of internal unity, even in the existing government. I mean, of course, when the president came in, he was making a big point to the international media of we're going to bring everyone together, we're uniting people, we're going to defend the country against Israel, against all these other people. But it seems in many ways, that is just not the case. And certainly, I think many of the things that many people for many years said about the resistance, that they were doing more than the government to defend the borders and things like that, also, taking on a different cast now that we're seeing what's happening. So, I mean, how do you see this playing in that regards as it concerns the sort of, near future of the resistance forces who I think, obviously pulled back in the context of the ceasefire?
Well, I think Hezbollah is just laying low at this point. And as you said, maybe, of course, I have no inside information, but one analysis would be that, letting things happen, even the clashes at the border, could be a way for Hezbollah to show that, well, if you don't want me to act, I will not act at all, and then you will see if you need me or not. If you want the army to deal with it, I will support the army and let the army do its job. I will do nothing, and then we'll see. Let the results speak for themselves. This is maybe a way of handling things. Of course, for somebody who lives in Lebanon, I am a bit worried because I know very well that the Lebanese army's capabilities are close to nothing. And even when they had the chance to prove, their some kind of military capability, at least against HES, I mean, I did not expect them to show anything regarding, facing Israel, because we know the discrepancy is huge, but at least HES, and they didn't do much. So of course they preferred to negotiate, which is a way, but also not at the expense of the local population, not letting HTS run rampant and loot people's houses and kill other people. So I mean, and at the same time, looking at the government, I mean, last time I was on your show, I was hoping at least that Hezbollah would be more engaged in the formation of this new government and how things are going. They did play ball, obviously, eventually, but looking at how things have formed, like from the formation of the government, from the appointments that they made, from the program that they adopted, from the budget that they ratified, it seems like it's going to be just more of the same. This is what we're looking at. They adopted the same program and the same budget of the previous Migrant government. And if you remember, they did this whole thing where they ousted Migrant and then they had Nawaf Salam in his place, only for the government to adopt the same program and budget, which says a lot about the future. Which means that not much is going to change. That's one thing, and then. And on the other, we look at the army and we look at their capabilities. We haven't seen much. We haven't seen it. If truly the army is going to take Hezbollah's place, then in defending the border, at least, there should be massive investments in training and recruitment in the army. And this is something that we've heard nothing about.
Anis, I wonder, given everything taking place, I mean, it's a pretty bleak picture that you're painting, where Lebanon's basically surrounded. We know that the huge portions of the south have been completely destroyed the closer you get to the border. in the south, the worse off the villages, and just like the border villages have been largely demolished, and people are pretty desperate to rebuild. But the U.S. and the Israelis are basically making it very difficult for Hezbollah to get money into the country to rebuild. They're trying to use that rebuilding as like a leverage against Hezbollah. And at this point, it's clear that Hezbollah has been weakened, and the Israelis just kind of have the freedom to do as they please in many ways, right? I mean, they've stayed at these 5 hilltop points at the border that are strategically located. They've taken huge swaths of land in Syria with little to no resistance because HTS is busy, massacring Alawites and starting border clashes with Lebanese tribal people. And on top of that, you have a situation where the loss of Syria makes it difficult to get weapons in. I mean, people are talking about the idea of, a future normalization not too far into the future between Syria and the Israelis. Where would that leave a country like Lebanon?
Well, it's hard to say. Well, first of all, the normalization between Syria and Israel is not set in stone. Second, the territorial integrity of Syria itself is not set in stone. Which Syria will be normalizing with Israel? Is it Jolani's Syria, or is it the Kurdish autonomous territory that has relations already with Syria, or is it the Suwaida governorate that Israel is planning on taking over completely? Like, what exactly are we talking about? Like, we still don't know on that front. Second, there's also, there is also Turkey as a player in this whole mess. Turkey obviously looks at Syria as the crown jewel of its expansionist ambitions, and they want it unified because Syria is only worth something if it's unified. If it's compartmentalized into small territories, it is completely useless. So this is when we might see some kind of antagonistic forces taking place inside Syria between Israel that wants to fragment Syria, between Turkey that wants to keep it an integral territory, and then you add into the mix the GCC. The Gulf countries that look at the Muslim Brotherhood in charge of Syria, and they are terrified because they've already faced some uprisings and problems domestically because of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they also want to antagonize. They also are competing amongst each other. So you have Qatar that supports the Muslim Brotherhood, Saudi Arabia that does not, the UAE also does not. They will not allow them to succeed, and they also do not want to see Turkey taking dominating the region. I mean, Saudi Arabia might be a bit relieved that Iran has taken a step back in the region, but now they look in fear. They see Turkey all of a sudden. Like, none of these things are pleasant surprises for anybody. So the GCC also, Saudi Arabia has been taking a stronger role, more present role in Lebanon, involving itself in all sorts of appointments and decisions. It's not very far off to imagine a future where Saudi Arabia might even have some kind of rapprochement, maybe with Hezbollah, in order to also antagonize and maybe contain, Jolani's ambitions and also Turkey's from Lebanon within Syria, and maybe they might also be playing a role in reconstruction. So, it is way too soon to understand where things are going, and I think the restart of the full-blown genocide in Gaza has thrown the entire region into chaos, into a chaos that might become violent once again. After a whole year of all-out violence and destabilizing, today the region is already less stable, and we've restarted the mechanism of violence. So it's really hard to say how these forces might materialize into any kind of change, or even if change is possible in violence, and what the outcomes of this violence might be on Lebanon, on Syria, in Palestine, even in Turkey and the GCC. We still don't know, but all of these players are definitely involved, and everybody's scared, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot to keep following here, and we appreciate you helping us sort through it as always. Dr. In East Germany, thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side. My
pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, Eugene.
Wow.
The region is like burning again. And Craig said earlier, the ceasefire was never really a ceasefire. It was a ceasefire if only one side ceases fire, which is how it always is with the Israelis. But the ferocity of horrors that has been imposed on Gaza these last few days is just, it's shocking, not because we haven't seen it before. It's just like, to what end?
Yeah.
It's just killing to kill.
It is killing to kill. 110 people, by the way, have been killed since dawn today, 591 since Tuesday, just over 1,000 injured. And of course, that's all we know about. And I think to speak to your point of how aggressive this is, I want to try to play something from a clip here of Israel Katz, who I think is the defense minister. Now, you know how these Israeli ministers be constantly switching around. But nonetheless, a message he sent to Gazans after the fighting had already resumed.
תושבי עזה, זאת פניית הזרה האחרונה. הסינואר הראשון הרס את עזה, והסינואר השני יחריב אותה לחלוטין. תקיפת חיל האוויר נגד מחבלי החמאס הייתה רק הצעד הראשון. ההמשך יהיה קשה בהרבה, ואתם תשלמו את מלוא המחיר. בקרוב יתחיל שוב פינוי האוכלוסייה מאזורי הקרבות. אם לא ישוחררו כל החטופים הישראלים, והחמאס לא יסולק מעזה, ישראל תפעל בעוצמות שעוד לא הכרתם. קבלו את עצת נשיא ארצות הברית. תחזירו את החטופים ותסלקו את החמאס, ויפתחו לכם אופציות אחרות, כולל יציאה למקומות אחרים בעולם למי שירצה. האלטרנטיבה היא הרס וחורבן מוחלט.
The alternative is total devastation. You will pay the full price. It'll be worse than you've ever expected before. I mean, I guess to be honest with you, Rania, it feels like from an Israeli perspective, they're just going for it. These right-wing Israeli parties, they believe in this greater Israel, you know what I'm saying, that all of historic Palestine should belong to them. Most of what's Syria, Lebanon, some of these things even go all the way into Iraq and different areas, the Sinai or whatever. And it feels like they just feel that they're just going to do it. This genocide and ethnic cleansing, that they're going to kill as many people as possible, starve as many people as possible, make it as difficult as they possibly can for people to live, and for the ones who stay alive, that they want to leave so that they can just fully take over. Like, they are fully going for it, all out genocide and ethnic cleansing. They're going to take this land. The economy minister, I think, said earlier this week, we need to take over all the West Bank too. So it feels like they're going for it. No matter how many people die, they're going for it.
But you know what, Eugene? This is, let's call it genocide 2.0.
Yeah.
They've been doing this for a year and a half now. And what they've learned in that year and a half is that there is no threshold that will make anybody step in to stop this. They've learned that they can bomb every hospital. They can starve premature babies. They can shoot children in the head for sport. They can fire, what was it in Hind Rajab? How many bullets was it? Like hundreds of bullets into a 6-7-year-old child. They can kill aid workers. They can kill doctors. They can rape people on camera. They have learned they can kill tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of Palestinians because to eliminate them. This is eliminationist. This is exterminationist. They can go on television and repeatedly say it from the top over and over again that they want to exterminate Palestinians, and there are no consequences. We've learned over the last year that in this moment in time, in the year 2025, there are no consequences for Israel carrying out an extermination plan live streamed before the world to see against the Palestinians of Gaza, and now it's being extended to the Palestinians of the West Bank. So as long as that is the situation, they will continue doing this. There's no reason to stop when there's no consequences and when your entire society is premised on the subjugation and extermination of the indigenous population. From cradle to grave for generations now. Israelis are raised to believe they have to eliminate Palestinians in order for their own survival. That is what they are raised to believe. That is what their entire society is high on genocide.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen.
And that's what they're doing. I just want to point something out. This right now, they're saying Hamas, but the media is disgusting.
Yeah.
Like I saw a headline today from the BBC saying the Hamas-run ministry says this many people have died.
Right.
I mean, a year and a half into this, and you have the audacity to sit here and try to gaslight us into believing that this is a war on Hamas. This is a war on Palestinians. It's a genocide on Palestinians. Israelis say it. It's disgusting how the entire Western and honestly Gulf state media apparatus is still participating in this genocide. You are a participant in this genocide if you are a news editor writing the Hamas-run ministry.
Yeah, well,
It's
this
disgusting.
actually came up at Politico this week because they ran an article that didn't say the Hamas-run ministry. And Politico, for people who don't know, is owned by Axel Springer, which is a big media conglomerate in Germany, but it's notably right-wing. Actually, when you sign up to work there, you have to sign something saying you'll support Israel, believe it or not. But this guy from the board is like, who authorized this at Politico? And basically just lambasted them for telling the truth. So I'm sure whoever did authorize it is in trouble, if not fired. But it was kind of amazing because it wasn't like it was a totally fact-based article. Not much you could say. But I just want to also note about this. I mean, there is a perverse logic to this because Israel from the very beginning has been a settler colonial project. That's in fact how they gained favor with the West in order to support them, with the British in particular, is they absolutely told them, like, we are a colonial project. We are going to colonize this. You look at like the New York Times from when they decided to go there, and it even says like Zionists vote to colonize Palestine. But, so the history is there. It's all there. Many people have written about it. I don't need to say it. But I say all that to say the only like successful settler colonies are United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, basically. And then, a few other islands connected to them. And what is the thing that we can note about those is the only way they survived is total extermination of the population. You look at South Africa, you look at Kenya, you look at some of the Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia, they were not able to kill everyone. And so ultimately, they weren't able to succeed fully in their overall project. So I think from the point of view of the Israelis, and this is the point I was making about Greater Israel, they've always been very clear that the Israeli project can't really succeed unless it totally ethnically cleanses the territories it considers to be its own and kills or expels anyone that stands in their way. And they've carried that out kind of, in fits and starts over the years, but very consistently over time. And now I think they're putting their foot on the accelerator. And I think to your point, they recognize that this is an opportunity. Like right now, no one really does seem like they want to stop them. So they better act now. And this is what Netanyahu has been known for. I mentioned this on this show many times, how he actually said just after Tiananmen Square that they had made a huge mistake not to have a massive transfer of population of Palestinians outside of the occupied territories while everyone was paying attention to China, because it would have been a great opportunity for them to do things they might not have been able to do otherwise. And so obviously, the most opportunistic politician, almost anywhere on the planet, he and his friends are recognizing we may never get another chance like this. And that's why all these far right-wing parties that are backing them are like, we can't end the war. We have to keep moving forward. We have to finish this until it's over, because they know if they were to actually go through with the ceasefire, they might not get this chance again. They might not be able to do what they're doing right now, and so they're going to kill anyone that they can in the context of it. I also just want to note, just from the point of view of the media per se, not the media per se, the breaking news per se, in addition to ground troops have gone in the Netzarim corridor, they also have started a new ground operation in Rafah. So an expansion, not just of bombing, but of the ground campaign in many different ways. But, what I will say, Rania, is many times people escalate when they have the upper hand and it ends up backfiring on them. South Africa is a good example of that. Napoleon is a great example of that. Hitler is also a good example of that, to be honest with you. That I think that the implications of driving massive shifts in the global status quo are often not what you expect, which is why in the Israeli media, you're now starting to see more criticism emerge of Netanyahu, of people who are worried that perhaps he is pushing it a little too far and that they can't predict what the consequences are going to be. And they may be consequences that they cannot control in terms of shifts and changes in the region, including some of these, kind of extraordinarily weak governments who are taking no action, perhaps not being there because of their own population's feelings. So I think it's a terrible situation, but I also think that there's an element of historical precedent here that's important to keep in context, that, oftentimes those who seem all powerful, that is, pride cometh before the fall, as it says in the Bible.
No, I think that's a really important point to grasp onto, because I think for a lot of people, this is just, you're going to do this again? You're going to make us all watch this again? It's like it starts to invoke a kind of helplessness among people that needs to be rejected. And also you can see the fact that you have all these repressive measures being carried out to shut down the movement for liberation in Palestine in this country, by really trying to terrify people, particularly students, particularly those who are on visas. But in general, they're trying to chill protest against genocide. They're doing everything in their power, using the violence of the state of the U.S. against people here to silence dissent against this genocide.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's at the same time, like, the people of Gaza are enduring a Holocaust. There's no other way to look at it. They're enduring the worst thing imaginable, and we're all being forced to basically watch it on our screens. And so we can't, the fear they're feeling is, significantly more intense than any fear that we feel here. That's for sure.
No, for sure. I think that it's the worst case scenario. And I think the point you're making too also about the chilling of speech, which I think is really important here, and one that we've seen with the gentleman, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name now, from India, who was recently deported because of his wife, or because of his, or not his wife, excuse me, because of his wife's father, at least allegedly. It's something I've been pointing out to a lot of people. There are millions of mixed status families in this country. So, regardless, this will have a chilling effect on all free speech, because I think it's important for people to understand what they're doing here. Like, they're using the guise of these deportation laws that the Secretary of State can get rid of anyone. But it's important to sort of read the fine print, so to speak. What they're saying is that speech is equal to action, which is something that is totally outside of the tradition of the First Amendment, which is that you can say whatever you want. And the government can only stop your speech when the speech is part of a broader subset of criminal activity. So if you say, you love Hamas, theoretically under the First Amendment, that in and of itself should be legal. But if you say, I love Hamas, and then it's part of a broader thing of you working with Hamas to take out some sort of act that would be illegal in America, then you can be arrested and you can be jailed. Your speech is not being criminalized, your actions are being criminalized, and your speech is one of many different forms of evidence of, your connections to some form of criminal activity. So once they've been able to establish this from the point of view of people who are, on green cards, permanent residents, on visas, or undocumented, whatever it may be, it's not a big jump for them to start bringing cases against U.S. citizens and to say the exact same thing, that this person said X, Y, and Z, and that is a form of support of terrorism or some other form of whatever. Journalism, same thing. Well, they communicated with this group to arrange an interview, and I view the interview as being too friendly. So in fact, that was a conspiracy for them to be a part of a criminal action, with these organizations. So you can see how slippery the slope is for citizens. But I, again, want to just go back to where I started here, is that there are millions of people in this country where, someone's a permanent resident, someone's a citizen in terms of a child, a spouse, or a parent, which means that if you see a situation like what happened with this gentleman from India, you can think, okay, I'm a citizen, but my spouse is not a citizen. So should I go to a protest or speak out against any issue? Right? Like, let's just take it outside of this. Let's just go to tariffs against Mexico. There's a lot of Mexican Americans here. If your wife is not a citizen and you're a citizen, you're a Mexican American, she's a Mexican permanent resident, your kids are citizens, do you want to have your family ripped apart if Trump just decides that anyone who is supporting the Mexican government now is an enemy and you can be deported because the Secretary of State has decided that you have some sort of detriment to U.S. national security? Now, your wife will be ripped away from you and never see your kids ever again? Or you have to move your whole family to Mexico to remain united? You can see the creeping nature of this is really not that creeping, is dangerous. But the reason why, and I'll close here, Rania, and let you have the last word on this, I always go back to something that the guy in Palantir, Alex Karp, the CEO, said in the middle of the encampments here. He said, if we can't defeat these encampments, the U.S. will never be able to deploy any offensive military capability anywhere in the world ever again. And so from the elites, they recognize that the solidarity movement with Palestine and the struggle of the Palestinian people is so powerful that it could actually undermine the ability of U.S. imperialism to carry out its goals, far into the future. So they have to muzzle the movement in solidarity right at the moment where the genocide is restarting, so that nexus of the resistance and steadfastness of the Palestinian people and the on the streets, in the ballot box type of pushback happening all around the world can't come together like it did before to create a massive political crisis in many of the most powerful countries as well. So it shows the interconnected nature of the struggle worldwide, but I think it speaks to how powerful it is in terms of what they want to muzzle there.
And yeah, just the name of the Indian postdoctoral associate at Georgetown University is Badar Khan Suri. And he was arrested in Northern Virginia yesterday by ICE. And I think they're trying to send him to Texas, to a facility in Texas.
I think they've sent him to Louisiana already.
Oh, they sent him to Louisiana as well. Well, he is married to a Palestinian-American woman, and they're claiming that he represents a threat to national security because him and his wife potentially hold anti-Israel views.
Yes, and I guess her father...
They're saying
in 2006... So people have to know the history. In 2006, Hamas wins elections.
In Gaza.
In Palestine. Very significantly. But what's important to understand about this is Hamas decided that they wanted to open up the government. And they wanted to try to have unity and bring in different factions. They recognized a lot of people didn't necessarily, get down with Hamas. So there was a wide range of civil society that was coming in to work, in this new government. And it was sabotaged by the U.S. and by others. But what's important is the allegations are, and the only proof I've seen of this is a Hindustan Times article from 2018. So I'm not saying this is true. But even if it is true, I think it's not what they say it is. That her father at one point was a participant in this government that was, again, bringing together a pretty wide swath of people. And people who were around in 2006 will remember, Khaled Mashal was giving interviews to the Washington Post. And they were not trying to be we're just taking over and doing everything ourselves. They were trying to work with the quartet. The whole nine, the quartet had pushed for the thing. So it wasn't like some secret thing. That he was involved in that. Then subsequently, as a civil society person, that he had advised them on different times in different places about the nature of the government. So they're raising that.
Also not her, by the way, her father.
It's not her, it's her father. There's no actual connection to, any form of terrorism. At least as far as I can tell from what I'm reading, his engagement has been purely as a civil society actor with an elected government in his own country to provide various forms of advice. I mean, they don't even seem to be accusing him of himself doing anything terroristically. So there's no evidence of these people doing anything whatsoever except being related to a guy that, at one time, maybe in some way had a relationship to Hamas. So it just shows how crazy this is, but it's also revisionist history. And I think it's important to recognize it's revisionist history because that election was very important on a range of different fronts. And people have forgotten it was George W. Bush who really pushed for that election for different reasons. And then when Hamas won, they all were freaking out. And when Hamas said, let's have a unity government, that was sabotaged by, Mahmoud Abbas and various different Western actors. So it's not what it was even made out to be. And I think that this caricature of Palestinian factions by Western media makes it so hard for people to really understand what's going on. But it's scary how easy it can be twisted.
Well, I also just, one last thing I'll say here before we get to our next guest is I also want to note that the pushback from Democrats has been minimal to non-existent. And there's a reason that the Trump administration is going after this from the Palestine angle. I mean, one, it's to shut down the movement for liberation of Palestine. And like you mentioned, the Palantir head noting that if we don't shut down the student stuff now, we're never going to be able to do any U.S. wars later. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is the Trump administration wants to get rid of birthright citizenship. and wants to get rid of free speech. And in order to do that, you go after the most vulnerable thing. And the most vulnerable thing is Palestine, because progressives aren't going to get behind it. And I mean institutional progressives.
Sure.
I mean like the progressives, inside the Democratic Party, the various organizations that make up that sort of I guess
Nexus.
Yes, nexus, network, whatever. And so it's so I actually was thinking to myself, has AOC said anything?
About Mahmoud Khalil, she has.
She has, but it took a minute. She signed something, but where are these progressives? Because we know that James Carville said to roll over and play dead about Democrats, and it's Democrats kind of are rolling over and playing dead. There's been some mumblings here and there, but for the most part, this is insane. They're letting them have free reign, which shouldn't be surprising, but this goes beyond Palestine. That far beyond Palestine. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't care about that. You absolutely should. But even for those who don't, because they're a bunch of anti-Palestinian racists, or they're scared for you speak out on Palestine, you get attacked. This is the biggest attack on the First Amendment and on immigrants in this way with the law. With the kind of effects it'll have that we've seen, I think maybe in our lifetimes. This is a McCarthyist level witch hunt.
Definitely, that's the best parallel, but we'll save that for another time. We're going to move here now to another issue regarding the Trump administration, and that, of course, is the issue of deportations. A lot to be said there. Very happy to be joined here once again by Zoe Alexandra, who is the editor of People's Dispatch. Zoe, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great to have you. Well, the big story, of course, this week, vis-a-vis the various deportation issues, is the deportation of a number of Venezuelans, not to Venezuela, but to El Salvador, where they have been taken in by Nayib Bukele, who's the president there. We're seeing a picture there on the screen of this prison that they're being sent to. Let me just start here, Zoe. I mean, what do we actually know about the people who were deported? Because, of course, the way it's being presented is that they're all these, violent Venezuelan gang members, but I've seen some news that people are disputing that is, everyone who is involved in this. Obviously, you can't speak for every individual person, but, what do we know about some of those basic facts about how this is being justified?
Yeah, well, I just want to start by saying that I think what Rania just said about the deportation of, Palestine activists and the detention and repression using immigration law is happening at the same time that immigration law is being also weaponized in this case. So, for example, these Venezuelan migrants who you're seeing on the screen right now are essentially accused of being foreign enemies, part of Tren de Aragua, which is, in Trump's mind, this gang that's invading the United States, and in the executive order where he kind of invokes the Alien Enemies Act, he says that Tren de Aragua is being used by the Nicolas Maduro government to overthrow and destabilize the government. So first of all, using the most explosive and divisive and just crazy rhetoric to completely misrepresent the situation. There's no invasion of the United States, and there's definitely no attempt by the Venezuelan government to use a gang which it fought against for a decade to eradicate in Venezuela, to overthrow the U.S. government. So the first thing I'd say is that the premise for everything that's happened since then is insane and completely invented, falsified, trumped up. And then you have essentially around 250 Venezuelans who are accused, again, by the Trump administration, by immigration authorities, of being part of this gang, which, has different, what is Tren de Aragua is a really great question. We don't need to get into that right now, but these 250 people who were rounded up are not part of Tren de Aragua. Some of them might be, many of them are not. They're tattoo artists, they're musicians, they're Venezuelan migrants who were maybe denied asylum. They're basically Venezuelan migrants, largely men who are in the system, who immigration authorities knew about, who maybe have tattoos, and who basically racially fit the profile of what they want to construe as this image of these violent criminals and these, these gang types that they want to kind of paint to the US public that they're going after. But, there's many, many stories coming out. Family members in Venezuela who have come and testified, who have said in rallies and interviews that they had no idea what happened to their sons, and they see them, they appear in these images, and they say, there's stories of one guy who was a musician who lived in Chile for many years, who was a migrant there, and then who went to the US. He was a musician. He got picked up. He didn't have his, I think it seems like his asylum application did not go through. We know many people actually lost status because TPS was revoked. That's an entirely, that's also part of this attack. But it's humble workers who are just now being rounded up. And again, it's really based on these kind of archaic and what seemed like was in maybe a past decade of, oh, they have tattoos, they're gang members. But that's literally why some of these people were rounded up. And so there's many tragic stories coming out of people having no idea where their family members are, and now not knowing how long they're going to be held in El Salvador, what kind of conditions they're going to be held in. There's talk of the fact that they'll be subjected to forced labor. Nayib Bukele has already kind of hinted at this. I even heard today a case of someone who's, I won't go into details because it's actually quite sensitive, but they had no idea where their son was. Half of the family is asylum seekers, and now they're just scrambling to figure out what happened and if there's any way to get in touch, if there's any way to actually get them out of this situation. But it's a really unprecedented, because we're not only talking about people being rounded up, accused of being members of a foreign terrorist organization, which Tren de Aragua has now been designated as, but also being sent to a third country where they have no, what rights are they being held under? What legal status do they have there? All of this is ambiguous and completely uncharted territory.
It's really horrifying, shocking, unprecedented. Just the destruction of people's lives, and then the not knowing if it's ever going to be over. But Zoe, I didn't realize this. You mentioned, so there's temporary protected status, which Venezuelans qualified for until like recently. So you're saying, sorry, I just want to clarify, some of these people, they rounded up and said because they were overstaying their ability to be here because of temporary protected status being revoked?
So there's a lot of, I think right now, there's a lot of different kind of levels of what status people have achieved, what they have. We know that essentially for several years, the US government, in its attempts to kind of foment this rhetoric that Venezuela was in crisis because of its own socialist government. Of course, we know that Venezuela is in economic crisis because of the crippling US economic sanctions. And so the US was, again, trying to say, look, there's this mass migration happening from Venezuela because the government of Venezuela is evil, because the government of Venezuela is corrupt. And so millions of people are leaving. This was the big US talking point against Venezuela. We know that it's been used, in many different forums to as evidence of kind of the quote unquote failure of the socialist project there. And so, as we've seen in the past, the U.S., of course, weaponizes, immigration status and benefits that it can offer to certain types of immigrants to, on one hand, of course, go after its political rivals. So say, okay, we're going to give, this TPS to Venezuelan migrants if they say that they're being persecuted by the Maduro regime. And then also, of course, this is, has been used in different ways, but it also kind of creates this a bit of division within the immigrant community, because then certain people are afforded special rights, etc. And so essentially in the past month, the Donald Trump administration said that it was revoking TPS for a couple 100,000 Venezuelans in different phases. Some of that has started, there was one group, I think, that in this month they're going to lose status, others later on in September. But the point being that many people went to the United States under false pretenses, thinking that the US government was going to offer them asylum status, refugee status, different protected statuses, whether it be TPS or otherwise. And now the US government has essentially completely walked back on that, on those kind of agreements and those commitments. And these, again, sometimes it's illusions. I was looking at videos from the mobilization in Caracas, which took place, protesting these detentions and deportations. And in some testimonies, some people were saying that actually right-wing Venezuelans, like the party of Leopoldo Lopez, other right-wing parties were actually recruiting young Venezuelans to migrate to the United States. And they were actually making promises. If you go to the United States, if you leave, if you then denounce the government of Maduro, like you're going to have these specific privileges and protections. So there's a host of different reasons and different statuses that people have had in the United States, and now essentially they're turning around and saying Venezuelan migrants across the board, whatever status you have, whatever livelihood you have, you are now essentially considered criminals, and you are not only going to be detained, but you actually might be deported to a third country. We also know that there were those other migrants who were deported to Guantanamo Bay. The Venezuelans are essentially being used as this kind of horrific test case of how far the Donald Trump administration can go with dehumanizing migrants and completely criminalizing and taking away their fundamental human rights.
No, it's a great point. I mean, it's really in many ways a big time extension of the Black Site program, right? You use these third party countries to just disappear people, but now it's, not, a few hundred people. It seems like it's tens of thousands at least potentially who are subject. And, I think for many people, Nayib Bukele is also getting something out of this, I think, in a material sense, but also just in terms of his profile. So I was hoping maybe you could talk about that a little bit. I guess he is relatively popular, but I think a lot of it is based on this sort of demagogy that I think he is using this, situation as well to bolster.
Yeah, definitely. Nayib Bukele has been kind of the favorite, the great example of the far right, both within Latin America and the Caribbean, and really on a global level. He has kind of taken forward this project of complete authoritarian rule, whether it's suspending Congress, whether it's essentially suspending the rule of law, establishing consecutive states of emergency to go after his war on the gangs, imprisoning over 60,000 people, I think, in the span of like a couple of years in these massive prisons, which are now being used to detain immigrants. And so, of course, both sort of like liberal human rights advocates, but also, of course, people of the left have been heavily criticizing this policy of Nayib Bukele. And despite the fact that he has some degree of popularity because, of course, this policy of mass incarceration, was a populist and right-wing response to the very real issue of crime in El Salvador, which, of course, has a deep legacy in, not only the intervention of the U.S. in that country, the participation of the U.S. in the Civil War, many other factors which destabilize the country, collusion of the DEA with, for example, these drug trafficking groups, so many other things. But his response, again, has been to incarcerate tens of thousands of young people. Again, the far right has used this as an example. It's now called the Bukele model, essentially be tough on crime to the most extreme version of it. And he now is not only the poster child, but he's also using his model as, a profit-making tool. And so right now, receiving these Venezuelan migrants is what seems like it's going to be a long-term plan where El Salvador is paid to essentially incarcerate detained migrants. And what's very chilling about this is that being an immigrant, migrating is not a crime. You should not be held in indefinite detention in any case. But right now, people are being deported to El Salvador being held in these high security detention centers, very, very difficult conditions, going to be subjected to hard labor, and there's no clear definition about how long do they stay there for? Will they be given a trial? What kind of trial can you be given in a third country? There's not like a US court in El Salvador. So what does this actually mean? People want to go home. They do not want to be detained. And so this really opens up an entire new Pandora's box where there's just kind of no clear end in sight, but this model of, mass incarceration, just, every single possible person that could be suspected of being a criminal receives that treatment. It's very, very concerning. And when you bring into it people being brought from one country to another, it kind of, again, it's uncharted waters right now, what we're seeing.
Zoe, real quick, I just wanted to ask you about one more thing, and that is the fact that, you mentioned that they're using the sort of Venezuelans as a test case. And there's a reason why Venezuelans specifically, in terms of there has been this media campaign in Spanish as well, in Spanish-speaking outlets as well, but also in the U.S., specifically geared against Venezuelan immigrants. And there's also just been this kind of like the fact that they got temporary protected status was seen as unfair. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of it? Because, I mentioned earlier going after the Palestine solidarity movement, it's because it's the most vulnerable thing to go after to achieve these other goals. So why specifically the Venezuelan migrants here?
Yeah, I think that the Donald Trump administration, despite liberals saying that he's stupid and he's a buffoon, is actually very calculated. And going after Venezuelan migrants has been a calculated move. And if you look back, the rhetoric that Trump was using during his campaign, the rhetoric that has been spewed on right-wing media outlets has been really targeting Venezuelan migrants in every way possible. So, for example, we know that we followed very closely the case of the apartment building in Aurora, where right-wing media, said that Venezuelan migrants were taking over this apartment complex and by extension, the entire city of Aurora. Part of the mass deportation drive is called Operation Aurora. Really like digging into this narrative that Venezuelans are criminals, that they're taking over the country. Very, very, little evidence to actually show for this, of course. But this has been a narrative that has been building for a while. They are extremely vulnerable as an immigrant community because on one hand, this is a very recent migration. If you look at, for example, the Mexican immigrant community, this is a community that has been migrating, for decades to the United States. There's very strong institutions. There's a lot of community support. There are organizations that have been formed. The Venezuelan migrant community, there has been historic migration, for example, at the beginning of the Bolivarian Revolution, when we saw a lot of people kind of flee Venezuela, maybe they were trying to protect their capital, but this sort of working class immigration that took place from Central America and Mexico into the United States is actually rather new for Venezuelans. So they don't have these strong networks of solidarity on one hand in the US to actually support them in this really challenging moment. But again, this right-wing campaign against them has been building for so long to depict them as criminals. There's been other incidents of, small incidents in New York. One person tried to steal a cell phone, and all of a sudden, all Venezuelans in New York are criminals. So what we're seeing right now is not an accident. Again, Donald Trump and the Donald Trump administration are trying out this strategy on, again, the weakest link, maybe the people that will receive the least support and solidarity. I mean, it remains to be seen how this is going to play out. But again, this was a very calculated move, criminalize them, stigmatize them, say that they are the reason that you don't have housing, the reason that you don't have jobs, the reason that there's more crime, all because of the Venezuelan migrants. And then, wow, what a surprise. They're the people who are, dehumanized, deported to another country, and then maybe sent into forced labor. So it's really important, I think, right now to highlight these elements and make sure that this, atrocious act and deep kind of violation of, so many different fundamental human rights doesn't go unnoticed and doesn't go unchallenged because, again, it's a test case to expand this, and who knows really what direction this could go in the future.
Well, as always, Zoe Alexandra, editor of People's Dispatch, thank you for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what a horrific, horrific situation.
Indeed.
Real quick before we go to the next guest, I just want to note that an MP from Canada has come out and said publicly, urged Canadian citizens to avoid traveling to the U.S. if at all possible, and to call on Canada to stand up for their citizens who are being denied their rights through arbitrary detention in the United States, because there was that Canadian actress that was held in ICE detention for 2 weeks in torturous conditions. But
not great for Myrtle Beach. We're going to move on here to the U.S. Congress. It's true, a lot of Canadians go there. Very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Walter Smolarek, editor of Liberation News. Walter, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks a lot for having me on the show.
Great to have you on the show. A lot of conversation about the continuing resolution, the Democrats rolling over in the Senate on this issue, what it could mean moving forward. Maybe just to start, I mean, what is a continuing resolution? Help people understand who maybe don't what this really is. And what are the implications in terms of the budget cuts that were really, I think, the biggest thing people were talking about in regards to the CR?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, to answer your first question, a continuing resolution is essentially the piece of legislation that Congress has to pass to keep the government open, to prevent a government shutdown from happening. But that's tied into much, much larger politics. So what Donald Trump and the Republicans are trying to do right now is to pass a budget that essentially contains all of their main legislative priorities. Primarily, that means massive historic tax cuts for the rich and for the corporations that rich people own, and equally historic cuts to the most basic social programs that people rely on: Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, food stamps. I mean, the list goes on. The Republicans want to pass this in the new budget. But essentially, they had a deadline in the middle of March. If they could not pass one of these continuing resolutions, there would be a government shutdown. It would create a crisis. And essentially, Trump and the Republicans wanted more time to craft this massive budget. There's a legislative maneuver called budget reconciliation that makes it easier to pass it this way. They want to do it all at once, but they need more time to basically hammer things out because their majority in Congress is small. So what happened is that Chuck Schumer decided, along with a number, about 10 other Democrats, decided to vote in favor of a continuing resolution and give the Republicans and Trump exactly what they wanted.
I mean, can you elaborate a bit on that? I'm not sure what elaboration is necessary. I mean, these two parties, every single time, a Democrat's in charge, you'll have the biggest upward transfer of wealth in history. Then a Republican comes and breaks that record. Then a Democrat comes and does it again. Then a Republican. I mean, this happens no matter who's in charge, it seems. But obviously, Republicans want to chop more away. But explain the lack of opposition to this bill, and why you think that is.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it really shows the complete bankruptcy of the Democratic Party, the total inability of the Democratic Party leadership, the establishment sort of encapsulated in Chuck Schumer, this longtime senator. Chuck Schumer, often called the senator from Wall Street because of his close ties to the big banks. Yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that they did not want to go to a government shutdown, which essentially means they didn't want to rock the boat too much. They still want to present themselves as sort of the responsible party of government and say the Republicans are too chaotic and we Democrats, we really know how to govern the country. And, usually this is what he would say in private to his, Schumer would say in private to his Wall Street donors, we'll cut your taxes too. We'll impose austerity too, but we'll do it in a smart way and in a way that's less politically risky. We had, for instance, during the Obama administration, a number of different congressional panels that was, supposedly about reducing the national debt, the national deficit, but really was about, cutting these basic social programs too. But that being said, I mean, I don't want to minimize just how severe, just how extreme the Trump agenda is. I mean, we're talking about historic cuts to kind of the bedrock programs: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the things that people, truly rely on for their survival. I mean, we can add to that food stamps and also LIHEAP, the low-income heating assistance program. So this is going to be massive, but yeah, I mean the fact that Schumer didn't want to be essentially blamed for a government shutdown, and so he gave Trump what he wanted. It really tells you all you need to know about the Democratic Party and their strategy for resisting or not the Trump administration now that he's back in office.
No, that's a very important point. I mean, we've already seen, cuts to food bank programs, different things like that, and it's only going to get worse. I mean, it really is an astonishing reality, Walter, when you look at it. People talk about this as the billionaire agenda, but I mean, it really does seem like that's not hyperbole in this context because, there's 72 million people on Medicaid. I saw something from the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities that 10 million people could lose rental assistance. I mean, this really is not like just a handful of people. I mean, this could really be, an actual majority of Americans that could significantly lose out, see their cost of living go up, see their ability to cope with that go down, while certainly billionaires will get a massive tax cut.
Yeah, absolutely. What they want to do is essentially extend the tax cuts that Trump passed the first time that he was in office. And specifically what some of those things look like. I mean, it costs about $4 trillion to extend these things for another 10 years. So it cuts the personal income tax rate that the richest taxpayers pay, the top income bracket. It cuts the corporate income tax, so the amount of money that a corporation has to pay out on its profits or on its revenue every year. It cuts that substantially. And it also does, I mean, there are a number of other smaller cuts. For instance, the estate tax is significantly cut under the Trump program. So, if you're a billionaire, it makes it even easier to make sure that your children are billionaires as well. So yeah, it's a billionaire agenda. I believe there's 17 different billionaires in Trump's administration in senior positions in one way or another. This, of course, fluctuates, but the combined net worth of those billionaires is like about $460 billion. So the idea that these are the people who are in charge of the programs that determine whether or not poor and working class people can get the bare necessities of a decent life, get life-saving medical treatment, can eat or not, can keep their home warm or not. It's totally absurd and outrageous, and it says so much about the deep inequality in society that these are the people in charge of making these cuts.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, I mean, these are all really popular programs. Well, many of them are really popular programs like Social Security. I'm not sure what the direct cuts are. You can elaborate on that if you can. But I did see that they're shuttering down Social Security administrative offices across the country. But these programs are things that Americans rely on. A significant number of Americans rely on. Eugene mentioned maybe a majority of Americans could be impacted by these cuts. So then the question becomes, how's the media covering this? Because if people don't know it's happening, they're not going to care. If they did know it's happening, I mean, if you start to touch Social Security, I feel like you'd have elderly rioters, honestly.
Yeah, I mean it's terrible. It's completely awful. The media. I think there's an element of the establishment media that is aligned with the Democratic Party, and we'll cover some of these things. But at the same time, you see like the Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, now completely reorganizing their op-ed page so that it's favorable to Trump's agenda. They're for personal liberty and economic freedom, I think, is the formulation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to be in favor of all of these things, and they'll sort of drag up the same right-wing talking points. Oh, well, Social Security is going to go bankrupt. There's just not enough money there. Well, I mean, there's an easy fix to that, right? I mean, they could lift the cap on Social Security tax. Essentially, once you make past a certain amount, you no longer pay Social Security on those wages. That's crazy, and they could make the whole system solvent and expand benefits if they would just tax that. So they'll have these talking points. Elon Musk is really good at using these, saying that essentially there's massive waste, which is something that's totally debunked in the Social Security system. And they're also doing things, like Rania mentioned, closing down offices or making certain services only available in person and not over the phone. There could also be more stringent work requirements, which really just means more paperwork and bureaucracy. There's a million different ways that they could cut Social Security and make it harder for people to get it. And they're probably going to try a lot of them.
Yeah, they sure are. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And just to double down on your point there, Walter, to such a degree, it's not only 17 billionaires, but you look at these people, like one of them, the head of the Small Business Administration, Kelly Loeffler, is the wife of Jeffrey Sprecher, who is the CEO of Intercontinental Exchange that owns the New York Stock Exchange. So like you couldn't get more like billionaires controlling the government directly than to have like basically the owner of the New York Stock Exchange as a major part of the government. You know, Howard Lutnick, who's there at Commerce, was with Cantor Fitzgerald, one of the largest financial companies. But one thing I'll just ask you really quickly here, Walter, before we let you go, it does seem that there is a rising resistance already to Rania's point. I mean, we saw that one congressman besieged by the tax the rich thing recently. I think it was earlier this week at his town hall. So it does seem, you know, slowly but surely there's a little subterranean fire coming to the surface as it becomes more clear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that even though the Democratic Party establishment, Chuck Schumer, totally given up, people are obviously outraged. I mean, there are demonstrations all across the country, you know, against mass deportations. There's demonstrations by workers at a lot of the federal agencies, the social programs that are under attack. You know, teachers are fighting back. They're, to your point, Linda McMahon, the, you know, WWE CEO, is in charge of the country's education. And she's, you know, likely going to try to actually abolish the department that she leads, a billionaire. I mean, so, you know, on all of these different fronts, there is organizing, there is struggle, but I think we'll see it kick into higher and higher gear as this process moves along in the coming months.
Well, I know Liberation News will be covering all of this on all levels, from the resistance to the substance of what's going on. You are the editor of Liberation News. Walter Smolarek, as always, thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
To be here.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Well, Eugene, I feel like we had a pretty successful show today.
Well, yes, agreed.
No, all of our guests are always amazing. It was really good to be here with you in person.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I do want to remind our audience.
Please.
First of all, if you haven't already, please smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. But also, we are in an era of, as somebody I saw today, Brian Becker called it an inflection point.
Okay.
It's an inflection point.
Great phrase.
It's an important phrase. There's a lot happening. A lot of things are really scary to watch happening, and the media is full of BS. I'll keep it family friendly.
Thank you.
And just
I appreciate
say BS.
that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we are, so we have a media environment that is just like a tsunami of constant propaganda for the billionaires that are making policies right now. So it is crucial that you support independent media if you are able to, independent media like Breakthrough News, to actually tell you the reality of what's taking place that you're not going to see, especially at the Washington Post.
Sure.
So I highly encourage those who are watching to go to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And please, for as little as $5 a month, you can support Breakthrough News, help us keep growing and growing. You can access exclusive content, exclusive merch, and be a part of this movement for independent media. It's really, really, really crucial. I mean, I personally, Eugene, started to understand the world in politics because I accidentally stumbled upon independent media. So I recognize the power in this sort of platform in bringing people the truth.
Well, couldn't say it better than that.
Yeah.
So please do. Shout out to all of our existing patrons and everyone who can go out and become a patron. You know, shout out to you as well in advance. That'll do it for us here today. For myself, for Rania, for the whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.